Our next panelist, who is from the Council of American Islamic Relations in San Francisco Bay Area, and she'll actually be doing a bystander training. As we know, post 9/11, Muslim Americans were targeted for just being who they were, and now we can be we're well aware of that as Japanese Americans, because now we are being scapegoated for COVID-19, this corona thing. Like, it is something that is very relatable. So she's going to talk to us on how to be a good bystander. She is the creator of the Bystander Intervention Training at CARE, and so we're super fortunate to have her. She's promoted programs like Muslim Youth Leadership Program and Muslim Day at the Capitol. She is just a really cool person, so I will give Courtney the floor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Courtney, and welcome to today's bystander training. I do just want to share my screen. Okay. Yeah, so thank you so much for having me and for bringing CARE into this important event that you were doing. We're really excited to be here. I first just want to give some credit to Montgomery County Civil Rights Coalition for creating the original bystander intervention training that we've been using and we eventually revised. So we've been doing this training for about 3 years now, and I've been facilitating it for about 2.5 now. Together, we've trained over 2,500 people in bystander intervention, and we worked with all types of organizations, companies, community groups, schools, etc. As just a housekeeping thing, feel free to drop in questions in the Q&A or chats, and that's it. So I wanted to start with. So my first question to you is, how many of you have heard of CARE and the work that CARE does? Okay, wow, a lot of responses. Great. So it looks like about half of these attendees, half of you know about CARE and what CARE does, but if you're new to CARE, or this is the first time that you're encountering CARE and its work, let me just tell you that CARE stands for the Council on American Islamic Relations. We are a nonprofit grassroots civil rights and advocacy group. We're the largest Islamic civil liberties group with over 30 offices nationwide. In the San Francisco Bay Area office is specifically the oldest CARE office, second only to the national office. And since 1994, we've worked to uphold the civil rights of American Muslims and all Muslims. So the core of our work is based around providing free, confidential, and culturally competent legal assistance to individuals who are discriminated against because they are American Muslims or perceived to be Muslim. More recently, we've also, we've launched an immigrants' rights program, which is actually not that recent. I think we've been doing it for a while now. We also just recently started taking employment and housing issues for people who are affected by COVID-19. Beyond our legal services, we also provide a voice to the media for the Muslim community. We lobby elected officials on relevant legislation, and we also do youth empowerment programs, workshops, and trainings like these. I always forget. 1 second while I catch up. So we're really proud of the work that we do at CARE, but we think it's important that we consider why we have to do this work at all. And the reason our work is necessary is because there are overarching structural aspects to how American society is organized and operates that oppresses and exploit various groups and classes of people. And these structural aspects are deeply rooted in the history of America and manifest themselves in racism, classism, patriarchy, homophobia, xenophobia, and other forms of bigotry that I'm sure all of you are aware of. But I just want to reiterate here how it fits into this training. And now we are seeing, an alarming rise of anti-Asian hate crimes and hate incidents, which I think some speakers here today have talked about and touched on. In my own, going through the news, I've come across really horrific stories of people being targeted in public spaces, businesses being vandalized. Sadly, stories coming out that are physical attacks with acids, with acid or weapons. And I've heard through some of the Facebook groups that I'm on that students are being bullied on like Zoom classes. So it's horrific that not only has the COVID-19 pandemic led to these racist attacks, but it's also exacerbating existing structural inequities that impact communities of color, people who are unhoused, people with disabilities, immigrants, and so on. Again, because these are deeply rooted structural issues that we're up against, it's necessary for all of us to be involved in movements for social justice and social change. This can mean taking part in a broad range of activities, from lobbying your local and national elected officials to engaging in organized direct actions and protests. Today, though, we're going to focus on a very specific problem: hate crimes, hate incidents, and harassment, and a specific way of addressing that problem, which is bystander intervention. While hate crimes and hate incidents and harassment are themselves symptoms of larger oppressions that we've been talking about, the bystander intervention is only the most immediate individual way of addressing those problems. But we believe there's value in this training, both because it's a way of providing a short-term relief and safety for marginalized and targeted communities, and because it's a good way for community members to start getting involved in longer-term struggles for justice. And it's important to note that many communities and groups have been facing this terrible problem of hate crimes and hate incidents for a long time. But we also know, and we know that the data is showing that this is getting worse in recent years, over the past few years. But we're also aware that the fact that the people who are reporting hate crimes and hate incidents are just the tip of the iceberg. Many cases go unreported. So to bring this closer to the actual experiences of everyone here in this session, I wanted to launch another poll and ask you all about your personal experiences with hate crimes, hate incidents. So how many of you have witnessed, heard about, or experienced a hate crime or a hate incident? A lot of polls coming in. Cool, I'm gonna just end that poll for now. So it looks like most everyone who is here today has witnessed, heard about, or experienced a hate crime or hate incident. And that's really telling. I know people may be calling in from a variety of locations, but oftentimes when we do this in person, we have at least half the room raise their hand for that question. And we're doing these from Bay Area locations. And that tells you something, that even in an area that's considered sort of like a liberal bubble, where there is less racism or less hate crimes, these are still really real issues. And even in locations where people say that that is more liberal, is still being impacted by racism and classism and sexism and so on. So with that, I just want to jump in with what today's goals are for the training. So the goal for today's training is to be prepared for what to do when we witness something like this happening, and to sort of understand what it looks like to put those principles into action, and to think through how to actually engage in nonviolent de-escalation in a variety of real life situations. So hopefully you'll leave here today feeling a bit more prepared and more confident to step into different kinds of difficult situations as a bystander. We're going to go through, first we're going to spend a few minutes talking about the values that underline the training, and then we will walk through a few steps that you can use when intervening in different scenarios. And then we'll talk about ways to secondarily intervene, such as collecting evidence and reaching out to authority figures. Next, we'll go through some specific scenarios, and I will discuss how the steps can work in each particular scenario. And then lastly, we'll save some time for Q&A. Cool. So it's a lot to cover, but we should be able to do it. And one final note that I want to make before we jump in is that this training is narrow in scope, and that it teaches you how to de-escalate verbal harassment. This training will not teach you how to deal with situations of immediate danger. So if a situation becomes dangerous, our recommendation is to leave as quickly as possible with as many people as possible. I encourage you to also take additional self-defense or active shooter training classes in case you are more interested in finding out how to de-escalate physical threats. But this training is specific to verbal de-escalation. Cool. So we're going to just jump into our values that underline this training. So the values that underline this training is safety, support, and solidarity. And reviewing these values is important because the reality is that one training cannot cover every single possible scenario. And in the heat of the moment, it may be difficult for you to remember every single little detail of the training today. But you can use your own critical thinking guided by these values, and that should allow you to stay on track with your intervention. Cool. So the first value that underlines this training is safety. And so break this down to a few points. De-escalation is the safest way to respond. There are many unknown factors involved when you're doing intervention, and you don't know what the stranger is capable of doing. You also don't know if there's, weapons involved, if they're concealed, that sort of thing. So those are the reasons that de-escalation is the safest way to respond. Secondly, be aware of how your intervention affects everyone's safety. So throughout this training, we will discuss how various choices have different repercussions. And it's really important that you, whenever you're making any decision in your intervention, that you're processing that critically and you're thinking through how it's going to affect the different people involved. Next, practicing helps us get past our hesitations so we can act when necessary. So we're not going to be able to do like hands-on training for this since it's virtual training, but we will go through the scenarios. I'll talk to you about the different specific scenarios, and if you are blessed enough to have people in your household right now, you can practice those scenarios with them. I really recommend it. Some of the practice may seem weird, but I really think it helps you sort of feel actually prepared to intervene. So our second value is support. So we are there to support what the targeted person wants. This means that we provide options for the targeted person and not act and act according to their wishes, not what we think is best. This is a really important point. We'll come back to it throughout the training. So secondly, we ask the targeted person if they want our help. We ask how we can best help them, and we ask before we touch them. So, of course, consent is essential when intervening and in all things. But when intervening to assist a targeted person, just make sure that you are checking in with them and making sure that they're comfortable with what you're doing, the decisions you're making, so on. So we want to shift the focus of the situation to the targeted person by only interacting with them as much as possible and by ignoring the attacker. And we do this because it's both for two reasons. One, because it's most effective, and secondly, because the targeted person deserves our attention more than the attacker. So definitely a key point of this is to focus your attention on the targeted person. So our last value is solidarity. So nonviolence is the most courageous way to respond. That's what we believe. So it's easy to lash out, but it's really difficult to hold in your emotions and act from a principled place. And you may not yet feel that you can do this, but my hope is that after this training, you'll feel a little bit more comfortable to do that. So we are there with the targeted person. We are there in solidarity with the targeted person, not as their savior. And so this is a really important point. Again, although our natural inclination is to go to the source of the trouble, for example, the attacker, and to try to make them stop, we recognize that this is not the most strategic way of responding, and it doesn't empower the targeted person. So it's not centering what the targeted person needs in that moment. So lastly, we do not call the targeted person the victim in this training because we want them to retain agency in the situation. And you've heard me saying targeted person already. So we really a core value in this training is that we want to give the targeted person back some of the agency that they're losing in the harassment, to empower them, to allow them to have control on how the situation develops, escalates, or de-escalates. So we're using the targeted person language. Now that we've covered some steps, if you have any questions, once we've covered the values, if you have any questions about these values, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. I'm not seeing the chat, so I'm not sure if anyone's asking anything. but we're going to move on to the steps that underline this training. So these are some more concrete steps that you can use to intervene. You may have seen this cartoon before. It is a purple ink cartoon that was popular on Facebook, but it seems like many years ago now that it was popular. But this is a cartoon by Merrill, a French cartoonist, and it is a good illustration of some of the points that we're talking about. So we're going to use it today. So the first step in intervening is to assess the situation. So it's really important to just be aware of what's happening before you step in. So be ready to intervene means making sure you're mentally and emotionally prepared to enter the situation. So you should be in a good headspace. And if you're not, if you're having a bad day, if you know that by intervening you might become emotional or not be able to de-escalate the situation, that's a good time to self-reflect that you may not be the right person to step in that moment. So the next part of that is to be aware of what's happening. So be able to hear and see what's happening around you. You should be looking around, scanning your scene, being able to hear what's happening. So once you've assessed the situation and you see that there's a hate crime or a hate incident, verbal harassment developing, you move on to the second step, which is to get others involved. So our goal here is to beat the bystander effect. So the bystander effect is a psychological phenomenon where the more people who are present to witness any event, the less likely any of them will be to step in to help. So if I were to drop my books in front of a crowd of 50 people, it's unlikely that any one of those 50 people would stop what they're doing and help me pick them up. But if I were to drop my books in front of one person and we were alone, it's more likely that that person would stop what they're doing and help me. And that's because we disperse our responsibility onto the people around us. And you have an easy way of overcoming that with the people around you by just reminding them that they are responsible. So you can simply say, hey, do you see what's happening over there? I think we should do something. So just by simply saying that to someone, that responsibility in their mind is going to trigger and say, you know what, I think I am responsible. I think we should do something. So once you've made that first step of alerting someone nearby, you want to give them directions for how to intervene. And this is important because it's unlikely that you'll run into other bystanders who have training in de-escalation or bystander intervention, which means even if they want to help, they may not know how to or what's the best way to. So you can say, hey, do you see what's happening over there? I think we should do something. Can you stay here and record what's happening, and I'll go talk to the targeted person? And that's one way to safely involve additional bystanders, but making sure that their actions are going to help and not hurt your intervention. So once you've got other people involved, the next step is to intervene calmly. This is when you're going to walk up to the targeted person. So you're going to want to introduce yourself and quietly explain you saw what was happening and you would like to provide support. And it's really important at this point to be aware of your tone and your body language as you move closer to the targeted person, because you don't want them to perceive you as a threat. So it's best to come up to them at eye level with a calm tone, open body language. You don't want to run in yelling or tower over them because they're gonna feel like you might be another target attacker, and they might perceive you as a threat. So it's also best to just introduce yourself in a very straightforward way. So by simply coming up to the targeted person and saying, hi, my name is Courtney. I saw what was happening and I want to be here to support you. Can I sit down next to you? So I was able to convey who I am and what my intentions are and what I'm asking for very quickly, which is going to alleviate some of the confusion that they might be feeling by you coming up to them. And I've seen some trainings recommend not alibis, but like excuses or like a false story about why you're talking to them. Something like, oh, I know you from the library, right? And if that targeted person doesn't actually know you and you're a stranger, coming up to them in that way might just cause more confusion. And when people are under attack or they're in a stressful situation, their ability to comprehend a lot of different situations and create a map for themselves is going to be a lot harder. So you want to simplify this conversation as much as possible and make it very clear, so you don't confuse them further. So then you want to make sure you ask permission before doing anything. So you want to say, when I said, "Hey, my name's Courtney. I see what's happening here, and I want to be here to support you." The next thing you want to say is, "Can I sit down next to you?" So if they say, "No, I'm good," you want to, give them their space. So you can step back from the targeted person. You don't have to completely opt out of the situation at this point. So you can say, "Okay, that's fine. I understand. I'll be nearby on this seat if you change your mind." So in the cartoon, we're in a bus, and it's going to be different for each physical location. But if you were on a bus or a train, you could say, "I'll be over there in case you change your mind," and then just monitor the situation from afar and maybe reassess if it's a good idea to check in again or to take a recording if the situation continues to escalate. But you definitely want to respect the wishes of the targeted person here. Okay, so next, either the attacker will start to de-escalate and move away, or the attacker will continue to escalate. So this training is encouraging de-escalation. So by ignoring the attacker, once you've stepped in and you're ignoring the attacker, the outcome is more likely to be that it'll de-escalate the attacker than escalate them. So you want to make sure that you ignore the attacker, even if they escalate verbally. And so we believe that ignoring the attacker has the greatest chance of de-escalating the situation, but it isn't guaranteed. So I don't want to say that in every case that's going to work, because some people come into a situation with an intent to do harm, and there's nothing you can do to dissuade them from doing so. And so if you notice that the attacker does not de-escalate quickly enough, you want to start thinking of alternative solutions, like how to leave that scene and how to try to get the targeted person out. So you want to be aware of their placement and their exit routes. So even though you're not paying attention to the attacker and you shouldn't be making eye contact or talking to them, you still want to be able to see them from your peripheral in case they escalate, become physically violent or something like that. So you want to just be aware of where they are and your exit routes. If you see the attacker continue to escalate, even though you're ignoring him or them in the situation to him, if you're ignoring the attacker and they continue to escalate, you want to try to leave the scene. Ask the targeted person, "Hey, I don't think that this situation is going to de-escalate soon. Would you be okay with getting off this bus and getting back on another one?" And that's an example I give on the bus. For example, it's going to be different in each physical location, like I said. So you want to ask them that, and then at that point, the attacker should leave, or you will leave the scene. So at that point, you want to continue to support the targeted person. So after the attacker leaves, continue speaking with the targeted person. What we don't want to do is just say, "Well, I guess you're good now, bye." So this is a great time to check in with them and let them know that they could report this incident. And CARE and the ACLU have report incident forms on their websites, and I've attached links to those in the handouts that I think were attached on the webpage for this training. So you can find those links to those report forms there. This is also a great time to see if maybe they need help finding mental health resources or counseling. So you can check in with them about that and see if they want you to share any resources with them. And then most importantly, make sure they get to their destination safely. So you might want to offer to walk with them or help them find transportation, maybe call them a Lyft or an Uber. Be careful about the way that you're approaching this. Since you're a stranger to them, you don't want to say, like, "Do you want to come to my place?" or "Can I walk you home if that's going to make them feel uncomfortable. So be aware of that, but help them get to their destination safely. So those are all the steps on how to intervene. We're just going to go through these really quickly. So the first step, again, is to assess the situation. So you want to be monitoring your surroundings. You want to be mentally and emotionally in the right space. And then once you see a situation develop, you're going to do the second step, which is to get others involved. So again, you're going to say to the other bystander, hey, do you see what's happening? I think we should do something. Can you take a video while I go talk to the targeted person? So that's the language that you can use. And then you're going to intervene calmly. You're going to come up to the targeted person and say something like, hey, my name's Courtney. I see what's happening here, and I want to be here to support you. Can I sit down next to you? And if they say yes, you're going to strike up a conversation with them and then continue to ignore the attacker until they have left. And then finally, you're going to continue to support the targeted person and make sure they get home safely. Ask them if they want to report the incident, if they need any other resources. So those are all the steps that I'm going to cover here. If you have any questions about the steps, you can drop them in the Q&A section. I have one question that I think might be able to be answered. If you're on the BART or Metro, would pushing or pulling the alarm ever be recommended? I don't know if I'm technically qualified to answer that question because I don't know what pulling the alarm on the BART does. I don't know if it stops the train, but if it does stop the train, I would say don't do that. I don't really know how that works. So I'm not sure, but I would say you want to keep your reaction at level to what's happening. So if you do something very drastic that's going to create a lot of attention, it could cause the attacker to escalate further. So you want to keep your reactions calm, as calm as possible.
We had a question in the chat that said, do you have any suggestions for how de-escalation might look different now that we need to also maintain social distancing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So if I guess you're out in public, it's a hard question to answer because I don't want to give you advice that's not good. But if you're out in public still and you're trying to social distance, I would say try to speak with the targeted person while social distancing, which I know is really difficult because you can't have a quiet conversation 6 feet away. You have to kind of raise your voice. But also if the attacker is not social distancing and you feel comfortable with coming up to the targeted person, I would say to go up to the targeted person. That's what I would do. I'm physically healthy, so that's part of the reason. But if the attacker is broken the 6 feet barrier, that targeted person is at risk, and I would see that situation as like needing an immediate response and that targeted person needing immediate support. But if you feel that that's not safe for you or that's not the right decision for you, I totally understand that. So you should think about your personal safety as well. And if it's not possible for you to get close to the targeted person, your additional options are to secondarily intervene, which is about taking video or finding a person of authority. So if you're in a bus, it could be someone who works on the train, a conductor, a bus driver. It just depends on the situation, but somebody nearby who can support with getting the attacker away. Great. So I hope that answers the question as best as I can. I saw a comment that says about pepper spray if you ever get attacked. Yeah, and that's, if you get attacked, you can use pepper spray. The one thing I would say about pepper spray, which this is in a self-defense class, is that if you're close to it or there's wind, it can spray back on you and it can hurt really bad. So just be careful when using pepper spray. it oftentimes is used incorrectly and comes back on the person using it. So just be careful with that. Okay. So we're going to talk about how to secondarily intervene. So one way to secondarily intervene is by capturing video and audio evidence of the incident. And this is important for seeking legal remedies after the incident. And this is something you can do if it's difficult or impossible for you to get to the targeted person, or it can be something you ask another person to do while you speak with the targeted person. So it's something you can do if you have an obstacle, or it's something another bystander can do if you're looking for ways to get other people involved. So this isn't a Know Your Rights training, and we do offer those, and you should totally tune into them. But I'm going to quickly cover the legality of collecting evidence in public. So while it's legal in all states to capture images of people in public, in many states it is illegal to record someone speaking in public without their express permission. And so you should be aware of what the laws are in your state. I'll talk about California. If you're a resident of California, it's illegal to record someone without their consent if they have a reasonable expectation of privacy. So if I were having like a one-on-one conversation with someone on a bus, and we're close together, we're trying to keep it quiet, a reasonable person would consider that a private conversation, and you would not be able to record it. But if I was yelling at someone from across the bus and everyone can hear, a reasonable person would not consider that a private conversation, and you would be able to record it. And then to answer one of the questions that was in the Q&A that is now relevant is, or in the chats, I'm not sure, is sometimes recording can have a couple different effects. And it's one of those things that, again, you have to go back to that value of recognizing how your decisions are going to impact the people involved. So you always have to think, is this escalating or de-escalating the situation? So sometimes recording the scene can bring a bad situation to a rapid end because maybe the person doesn't want to be caught on camera acting this way. Maybe they feel ashamed, maybe they'll stop. But you can also risk escalating the situation if the attacker doesn't want evidence of their behavior. So be prepared to monitor that situation and see if it's escalating or de-escalating, and be prepared to, if it becomes unsafe, to put your phone away or to lower your phone. You can sort of like hide your phone. You can go audio only, put it in your pocket. One thing I would say about this is the way that you record an attacker has an impact on whether or not they're going to perceive that as a threat or not. So when we're talking about ignoring the attacker, I mean, like, you don't want to be really engaging with them in any way. So if I were like, the attacker's here and I'm like this close to them, I'm trying to demonstrate this on camera. I was this close to them and I'm like, I have the camera on them, even if I'm not looking at them, but the camera's this close to them, they're perceiving that as me saying, oh, I got you on camera, I caught you, I have you. And that's a way of being passive aggressive to the attacker. And it's more likely that that attacker is going to respond by grabbing the phone or yelling or reacting some way. But if I was like 10 feet away from the attacker and I just have my camera just sort of like here, I'm, minding my own business, not really doing anything, the attacker is more likely to ignore that. And that's why it's a great option for the person who is not talking to the targeted person. Because if you're talking to the targeted person and you're recording, you're going to be closer to the attacker, and therefore they're going to perceive it more as a threat. Just a couple things about phones. You might all know this, but you can just swipe up if your phone's unlocked. You can just swipe up to get to the camera function. There's a little button here too. You can press that to get to the camera. I think other iPhones swipe up, and I think on Androids it's like left or right. So that's one way to easily get to the phone, the camera function. I recommend that you hold your phone horizontally. This is the orientation of media. So if it goes on the news, this is going to work out better. It also captures more of the scene. And then also just try to keep your phone like steady and, not moving around a lot. Focus your cameraing on the attacker and not on the targeted person as much. Just like you would with like ICE like ice watch sort of thing. When you're recording that happening, you want to focus your attention on the agent, because they're the one doing the wrong thing, and you don't want to have the targeted person's identity on there if they don't want it. So that's about it for the phones. If you have any questions about taking videos, let me know. And then we're going to move on to some what if questions. So one question that we often get asked is, should you call the police? And in general, we advise people to not immediately call the police unless the situation has become physically violent. And this is because there are many people who see the presence of police as a risk of escalation in and of itself. And this can be because they're undocumented and fear arrest, or because their community's experience with the police has been dangerous or disrespectful. So we recognize that there's often a strong element of privilege on the basis of race, class, gender identity, and ability involved in feeling free to call the police into a situation. We also logically know that if a situation didn't previously involve a firearm, by calling the police, we've brought a firearm into the situation, which decreases the chance of de-escalation. So as a bystander, you should remember that we're there to support what the targeted person wants. So that means that you should ask the targeted person if they want police intervention before calling the police. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to drop it in there. So another question we often get asked is, what if the bad situation involves police misconduct? So again, this is not a Know Your Rights training, and this is not a training specifically about police misconduct, but because we often get this question, I'll just answer it. It is always legal to record the actions of the police as long as you're not interfering with those actions. So I won't go into the legality in depth here, but the police cannot legally ask you to stop recording, to delete your recording, or to hand over your phone if you're not interfering with their actions. But that doesn't mean that they won't ask you to stop recording, delete your recording, or hand over your phone. And for those situations, we recommend the Mobile Justice ACLU app. You can, get it from any app store, I think. So what it allows you to do is just when you're recording a video, it automatically streams that to the ACLU. So if for whatever reason your phone is dropped or broken or taken or lost, that video footage is already in the ACLU. Now, this is only for police misconduct. Don't use this video function for the situations where it's just a random attacker from the community on another targeted person who's from the community. Cool. So now I'm going to cover some specifics, and we are going to, just a couple things, when you are practicing this, if you have time to practice this at home, just keep in mind some of the ground rules that I recommend that you use while you're practicing. So don't use any offensive terms while role playing. We want this to be like real, but not too real. Don't touch anyone. And you can make that rule up for yourself if it's like within your family or whatever, but don't typecast into your scenarios when you're practicing. So you don't need to play people who match your identity. And you don't also need to take on any affectations, costumes, whatever sort of identity traits are linked in your mind with the identity of the person you're playing. Cool. So I want to just cover some specific scenarios. So this is really similar to the cartoon one because this is on a train. So this is on public transportation. And so I just adapted this scenario a little bit because of what's happening so commonly right now with anti-Asian racist attacks in public places, especially on public transportation. So I just wanted to use this as the scenario. So in this scenario, we have a man harassing an Asian woman on public transportation. And when you're practicing this scenario, some things to think about, in addition to what we've talked about in the steps, is what I have seen in the news recently is that some of the attacks have been with chemicals, with either like some sort of cleaning or detergents or acids. So consider any chemicals that an attacker is holding as a weapon. So if you are encountering someone who's using chemicals during an attack, that's a physical attack. It's with a deadly weapon in some cases. So take that very seriously. Please look out for your own personal safety. Try to get the targeted person out of that scene as quickly as possible. So that's the only thing I really wanted to add to that particular scenario that we didn't already talk about. So on another scenario we have here is a man harassing an African American person on the sidewalk from a car. So in this scenario, we're in a different physical location than we've talked about before. And when it comes to cars, there's a couple of things you should think about here. So we've seen in recent history that cars can be used as weapons. So you definitely want to make sure that you're keeping yourself safe, and that you are trying to keep a physical distance from the cars. But cars can also be obstacles that are hard to pass through. So like if you're on a one-way street and you start walking in the opposite direction, that may be enough to deter the attacker who's in the car from making a U-turn and following you. If they do, however, make a U-turn and follow you, that's an escalation, and you should definitely think about getting off the street, getting into a public place, a well-lit place that has other people in it, like in a coffee shop or in a store. Because once they've done that sort of U-turn and that following, or they get out of the car and they start following, they're escalating and they're more likely to be physically violent. Something I think I didn't mention before to look out for with escalation and de-escalation. You know that someone's escalating when they're doing this if they keep getting closer. So like if I'm angry and I'm getting closer and closer to you and my voice is getting louder and louder and I'm saying more, that's an escalation. And if someone ever puts hands on you or on the targeted person, that is an escalation. That is a sign that that person could be physically dangerous because they're willing to break that physical barrier. And now at de-escalation, you'll know it's happening because people become a little bit more shy. Slowly they'll, sort of back up. They'll start to make a little bit more physical space. Their voice will get a little bit quieter and they'll stop saying as many words. And it might be a slow process because people are kind of proud, and it's hard to step down from that situation. So it might happen gradually. So another thing to consider with the sidewalk in the car is that people are a little bit worried about people who approach them on the sidewalk. Everyone feels that way, especially at night. So don't bring a large group of bystanders with you when you come up to the targeted person. That's definitely going to be perceived as a threat. So just bring, just one person or two people. And then the last thing with this scenario is to make sure that you are, you're getting the make and model of the car and the license plate number, as well as the description of the driver. So there's additional evidence to collect here. So in this next scenario, we have a person harassing a Latinx person speaking Spanish with a store clerk. So in this scenario, we're going to be even more complications with physical location. We're in a store. There's the addition of the store clerk. The attacker is probably, we're thinking of a checkout line here, and the person speaking Spanish is checking out with the store clerk, and then the attacker is somewhere in the line, as well as the bystanders. So some of the issues here is, don't worry about losing your place in line. A lot of times we get stuck with the social norm of this is a line, I can't leave my line. And then also realize that other people also do see this as a social norm and that you shouldn't cut. So when you leave the line, don't try to leave the line and then pass the attacker to go to the front of the line. Go leave the line from the back and then go all the way to the front and then come back around to talk to the targeted person. That's going to be logistically the safest way of doing that. And then another issue that comes up with this is, how do you intervene with someone? How do you support the targeted person if you don't speak the same language? feel free to drop in the chats if you feel like you have an idea of how to support someone if you don't speak the same language as them. I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are. One of your options obviously are to ask the store clerk to translate. Oftentimes people come up with the idea of Google Translate. But even if you have none of that, even if you cannot find a translator, you don't have Google Translate, you should still intervene. I know that sometimes it's hard to make that first step if you know that you don't speak the same language as someone. But even if all you're doing is, putting your hand on your heart, you're making eye contact, you're smiling, and you're not fully understanding everything that each other are saying, the targeted person is going to know that that is a sign of sympathy and support, because these are universal signs, the hand of the heart, the smile, kind eyes, and that is still going to provide them some support, and they're not going to be there alone. So don't feel afraid to step in, even if you don't speak the same language. And then the last scenario that I wanted to cover quickly is a transgender woman stopped while heading into the bathroom at a restaurant. So this is a really physically challenging location because it's a bathroom, and that's a really sensitive place for people. So you want to be really mindful about how you're engaging with the targeted person in that location. And then think that this can happen in a variety of different ways based on gender and the way that the bathrooms are built. So you may share the same gender as the targeted person, and you may be able to go into the bathroom with them, and it might be a multi-stall. So you might be able to provide support inside the bathroom. But on the other hand, you might be of a different gender than the targeted person, but the attacker may be of the same gender and may be able to follow the targeted person into the bathroom, and you cannot. So you have to think about about the different ways that this may manifest logistically, and think through those as you're sort of processing how you respond to that. So some things to definitely keep in mind and make as a goal, though, is in all the other scenarios, I mentioned that if the attacker continues to escalate or is not de-escalating quickly, start thinking about your exit routes and asking the targeted person to leave. In this scenario, I would recommend that you don't ask the targeted person to leave, because that would mean that they cannot use the bathroom, which is a basic bodily function that they have the right to do. So this situation is a little bit different than the other ones. By leaving, you kind of give in to the attacker, and that's not the goal here. The goal is not to just give in to the attacker. The goal is to support what the targeted person needs and wants at that moment, and sometimes that's their safety, and sometimes that's their bodily need to use the restroom. So try to preserve the ability to help the targeted person use the restroom, be supported through that process. Yeah. And then the other thing to think here is that this is another location where there could be people of authority who are not police officers. So you have restaurant managers, etc., that could support with the de-escalation. So with that, I have covered all the content. If there's any questions, I will try to answer them now. So I'm looking at the Q&A, but there's lots of questions. I don't think all of them are for me. Oh, intervention during online harassment. So that is a hard question. This training really doesn't cover online harassment, because there's no way to support a targeted person and ignore an attacker online in any sort of way that's going to impact the attacker. So the way that this works is that ignoring the attacker makes the attacker feel socially awkward. It makes them feel ignored. They're not getting the attention they want. They have nothing to respond to. And those feelings, if you get to practice this at home, you'll feel how deflating that is as an attacker. You should really try playing the attacker because it's illuminating. But that's probably not going to work on online harassment. Just ignoring the attacker isn't going to make them feel ignored or deflated, because that's how the online world works. If this is school related, or this is group related, I would say that the only solution I think of is bigger bullying prevention programs. I know that this is happening in school settings, on Zooms, on like Zoom calls, and it's necessary that those institutions and that that social media platforms and that school institutions have better bullying prevention programs, because if these people aren't strangers to each other and they're bullying each other, ignoring them doesn't work. You need a full-on prevention program and a whole like holistic response program with how you deal with that. And this is not the training for that. These are people. This training specifically deals with strangers attacking other strangers, and you don't know them either, so no one knows each other. You can't deter like a long-time bully by just ignoring them one time. Cool, great. Yeah. Oh, this is a great question. So someone asked. Sorry, am I going too long?
No.
So someone asked, wondering what you do if restaurant staff, for example, don't support you. And this is something that does come up when we do the practice in person. We have a little bit more time. But it's definitely a risk. And it could happen at the store. It could happen at the restaurant. When you ask an employee to support you, they may not be on your side. And it's something that you should consider when you're doing it. It's definitely a risk, because they may not support your opinion about it. It helps if you give direct questions. So if you can provide a direct ask for a person of authority at a store or a restaurant, it's going to help you. So if you come up to the manager and say, there is someone harassing a woman outside the bathroom, is it possible for you to talk to that person for just a couple minutes about something unrelated so I can help her get into the bathroom, for example? So you want to ask for a very specific type of support, because they're going to be more likely to be like, oh, yeah, I guess so, I could do that, you know? But if you just say, there's a problem over here, can you address it? You're giving them a wide range of possibilities with how they do that, and that could be them kicking out the person who's being targeted, for example. Okay, another question I think is good to answer is, what should we do if there's a bystander intervening by engaging the attacker, not being calm? So if there's another person intervening, not being calm, I think your best option is to still just try to talk to the targeted person, ignore that other bystander. And if that's not safe to do, then maybe it's best to take a video from far away and then sort of try to get the targeted person later on and like talk to them. Now, if this is a situation where the targeted person is responding by engaging with the attacker, I do want to say that that's their choice, because if you're the target, it's up to you how you respond to your own oppression and people harassing you. But still try to provide support to them, still try to talk to them, try to, you know, so that they're not alone, so that they feel supported in that moment.
Thank you so much, Courtney. That was super helpful.
Thank
Everyone
you.
should give her a round of applause wherever you are, because she is so thorough and she took us through so many different scenarios, and I very, very much appreciate that. So thank you so much, Courtney.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So that concludes today's program. On behalf of the San Jose JACL, Melanie and we would like to thank everyone for showing up and participating in this virtual pilgrimage to Manzanar. Although we are all navigating unusual circumstances with a new normal, I'm glad that we can all come together and participate in something that is unique and new. I feel refreshed by all the faces that I saw here today, knowing that the good fight is still being fought, that even though we're physically apart, we're not separated. I'd like to thank the former incarceree panel for sharing their own personal stories of hardship, for lending us insight into the life in the camp and how we can tell those stories and how they are still hauntingly similar to today. To Tomiko and Zara for showing us around Manzanar in a way that is so unique, it's a privilege to witness art that you feel a part of. To Susan and Tom, who helped lead the fight for redress and who took the torch from the Issei and ran with it to further the Japanese American community. And to Tomio, who taught us how to take action today. To Courtney and her friends at the CARE SFBA, who have been supporters of the Japanese American community from the beginning and who are allies in the true form of the word. And to the rest of you who have joined, Melanie and I are blown away by how many of you signed up and participated, and it made me realize that when we're not limited by geography, there is truly strength in numbers. I hope you all take something away from this experience, whether you stay for one or all of the sessions, that it inspires you to take action and that a drop can ultimately form a wave. So thank you so much. I'm so grateful for every one of you for participating today. It's been an honor. If you have signed up for the small group discussion, please log in to the other Zoom link that you have received at 5 p.m. Should be getting that soon. This link will serve as your portal into the small groups where you will receive a number to designate you to a certain group. Mel and I will greet you and assign you to a small group breakout session. You'll have an hour intermission for food, water, bathroom, whatever you like, and we'll start promptly again at 6 p.m. We diversified the groups as much as possible based on previous knowledge about redress and incarceration, age, gender, geographic location, and if they were a former carceree. You're moving from a webinar format where people cannot see or hear you to a Zoom meeting where people can see and hear you. Once you are in your small group, please mute yourself and turn off your video before going on break. If something happens and you're kicked out of the room, just go back to your original email and click the original link. So let me reiterate that. If you get kicked off by weird happenstance, please go back to your original email and click the link again. I hope you all have a good night if this is where we part ways. Stay safe and healthy and have a good night. And remember to buy some t-shirts if you'd like some t-shirts. So this will be our 1 hour break. If this is where we part ways, I hope you all have a great night. I look forward to meeting you all someday in the future. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.